There is some other breaking news I think we need to deal with here. We're just seeing via, well, where else but Twitter, President Donald Trump says, "I've informed John Bolton," that is, of course, the National Security Advisor, last night that his services are no longer needed at the White House. "I disagreed strongly with many of his suggestions, as did others in the administration, and therefore I asked John for his resignation, which was given to me this morning. I thank John very much for his service. I will be naming a new National Security Advisor next week." I think we've got Alan Fisher, actually, to talk through this one. Alan, what's going on? This seems like a surprise.
One, a surprise, and two, this is pretty brutal for Donald Trump. Normally, when people are fired by tweet, and he's done that a few times in the past, then it's we've had a disagreement or his resignation has come, and we know they've been fired. But here, this is pretty brutal, saying, I asked for his resignation. There were a number of disagreements that we didn't agree with his point of view, and that was the same with other people in the administration. And so John Bolton is out the door. What is also surprising is that less than a couple of hours ago, we got a message from the White House saying that there will be a briefing at 1:30 this afternoon. Mike Pompeo will be there. Steve Mnuchin, who's the business secretary, the Treasury secretary, he'll be there. And John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, will be there. I'm going to guess that John Bolton probably isn't going to be there now. Now, there have been disagreements between John Bolton and Donald Trump, and between John Bolton and Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo was very much in favour of peace talks with the Taliban, which, of course, Donald Trump told us yesterday were now over. John Bolton was completely against that idea. So it appears that Mike Pompeo, if there's a battle between the two advisors, Mike Pompeo has won. But Donald Trump has always quite liked John Bolton. He, in fact, thought about him as making him Secretary of State right at the very beginning of his administration, but always the TV producer. He decided he didn't look the part. He wasn't from, to quote Donald Trump, central casting, particularly with his big moustache, and therefore he kept him as an informal advisor. Now, Mike Flynn was initially his national security advisor. He didn't last very long. We remember that, with problems with communications with the Russians. He then had General McMaster, who was his national security advisor for a while, but he didn't particularly gel with Donald Trump. And then he appointed John Bolton, darling of the right, very hawkish on Iran. Everyone thought this was a good appointment for Donald Trump, particularly given his stance on Iran. But it seems that John Bolton has just run out of room, that there is nowhere else for him to go in this administration. Donald Trump has decided he doesn't want his voice in his ear anymore. And as I say, if there has been a power struggle between the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor, it looks like you can chalk this one up as a victory for Mike Pompeo.
Can I just go back to what you were talking about? Actually, it's what President Trump said when he said disagreed strongly. Just specifically, what were the big ones? Because John Bolton was always seen as he said it, this hawk, this very big player in the administration. What were the big things which have been the downfall in the end?
Well, a lot of things, of course, will be argued behind closed doors, but what we can guess at are Iran. John Bolton wrote a number of op-eds saying this was the right time for a war with Iran, that there should be armed confrontation, that we should be getting into a battle there with Iran. Donald Trump, although he's very much in favour of putting pressure on Iran, has backed away a couple of times from any sort of armed conflict with Iran. And although he's getting voices from Jerusalem, particularly Netanyahu, saying they've got to confront Iran, Donald Trump doesn't want to get involved in a Middle East war, and particularly not 18 months or so away from, 2 years away from a presidential election. And then Afghanistan. Donald Trump's foreign policy is driven a lot by the idea of what has no one else done? And no one else has taken the Taliban along and had peace talks with them face-to-face in Washington itself. Now, this was an idea floated by Donald Trump, that he wanted the Taliban leaders, if you believe reports initially at the White House, and that was put on hold because that simply wouldn't be a good idea, but then to take them to Camp David. But to do it this week, the meeting was meant to take place on Sunday. This is the week of the 9/11 commemorations. Donald Trump himself will be at the Pentagon tomorrow, on Wednesday, to mark the attack there. He will also take part in the national moment of remembrance at the time the first planes hit the towers in Washington, in New York. And so there's been this disconnect between John Bolton and also Donald Trump for a while. Donald Trump knew what he was getting with John Bolton, but he, of course, believes in taking his own advice. He said that about the meeting with the Taliban. I took my own advice. Not quite entirely sure how you do that. So clearly there's been a disconnect with John Bolton. And he was told last night, thanks very much, John, it's all over. There's the door. Leave your resignation as you're walking out.
Extraordinary development, and I'm sure we'll be talking to Alan Fisher more about it in the coming hours. Thank you, Alan. The breaking news in just the past few minutes, as Alan Fisher's been telling us, John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, the third National Security Advisor that there has been in this Trump administration, has been fired by Donald Trump. It's come out by tweet. It's come out with very strong language as well, with Donald Trump saying he strongly disagreed with John Bolton on many issues and therefore asked for his resignation, which was given. Another big name out the door in this Trump administration. We'll look to more reaction and analysis on that in the coming hours.